Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Expat Lens. Today on the podcast, I have the pleasure of speaking with a world traveler who has experienced living in multiple countries and been in and out of Japan on a few occasions. I think we're going to hear some very interesting insights about cultural exchange, language learning, and the process of how to find your way in a foreign country, particularly Japan. I am happy to extend a warm welcome to a new friend, Fabien. Hi, Fabien. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hello, Jack. Thank you for having me today. Very happy to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Let's start at the beginning, like always. You've mentioned to me previously that you first came to Japan in 2014. Do you want to talk about what your goal was and what that experience was like?
Yes, of course. So, I've been very interested about Japanese culture, but I would say more like East Asian culture. So, Korea, Japan, China, starting from 2012. And the reason was quite like particular. 2012 is when I entered the university actually in France. So, I graduated from high school. And until high school, I was not a very good student. I would say like half was my fault because I was not serious, and half was I didn't have very good teachers. Like, I can say that. But when I entered university, to be honest, I found amazing teacher that kind of like wake me up from a slumber
Mm.
in a sense. And I went from like being average student to like one of the best in my class. And of course, mostly thanks to my professors. And in that years, I had to study Chinese and Japanese.
Oh,
It,
wow. Okay. At the same time.
yeah, it was
Mm.
mandatory, but as cultural class.
Mm.
It was called like Eastern, Eastern civilization class. So, for example, the Chinese class was done by American, German, French teacher who spoke perfect Chinese, but
Wow.
like he worked on the tone so much and he taught us really the basics, but a very good teacher, one of the best I had. And he made us, I mean, most of us, very interested about something we didn't have any clue about, like
Mm.
Chinese characters.
Mm.
The Japanese class was more harder because it was from a French guy who I would say he didn't speak that well Japanese,
Mm.
and he was more teaching like kanas and maybe some kanji and speaking about Japan, but it was not that catchy as it was for Chinese.
Mm.
But at that time, I really like it rang a bell in my
Mm.
head, sorry. And I decided to study and continue by myself, mainly and mostly thanks to the calligraphy,
Mm. Okay. So it was the
the
unique
trigger.
writing style of
Yes.
Japan that really pulled you in. I'm kind of curious to know, like, why was the Japanese kanji, kana, hiragana alphabets more attractive than traditional Chinese for you?
First of all, it was simplified, of course,
Mm.
Chinese.
Mm.
And secondly, I would say because when we started picking up the language, also I preferred like Japanese over Chinese, like how it sounded, how
Mm.
you like the grammar, like comparing both language. But at this time, I was still like on the same level and they were on the same page for me. And what happened is that after 2 years, so in 2014, I had in both language like very basic level, not great, because first year was like basics and second year was optional. So even though I followed, I could speak, but really like aisatsu in Japanese, like not very complicated
Just
one.
hellos, greetings, and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
some like describe your journey, but not much than that. And in 2014, I don't know why exactly, but I want. Ah, yeah, sorry, I record now.
Mm.
Yeah, I remember. One of my best friends from high school, he did a language trip. Like he went to a school in England
Mm.
to study English, but it was mainly for fun. He went to Oxford
Mm.
for 1 month in summer and supposedly to study English, but he was to party, etc. And and he spoke about this experience. I was like, wow, it seemed fun, but I don't want or I don't need to study English at that time. So let me check if there are other destinations from the school.
Mm.
And I check online and I saw Japan, China, etc. I was like, damn, I've been studying Japanese and Chinese for 2 years. Like, I don't have anything to do in August. Why not have a try?
Mm.
And especially because the third year of university was starting, I think, beginning of October. So, no, sorry, I went in September.
Mm.
So I had 1 month in September. I was like, yeah, let's go like 3 weeks. And I had to pick between China and Japan, but I was more inclined to Japanese. So I decided to go to Tokyo. And then everything changed from this trip and day. Like it went exponentially from the people I met and from like how my brain like grew up, I would say, like how I view things. Because even though my family comes from a different country, so I have a multicultural background, I've always been living until that point in Paris, in France.
Mm-hmm.
And even like I didn't travel that much in France.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point on, when I came to Japan, I felt being like grown up.
Wow.
Because for the first time, I was, even though it was a month, I was living alone
Ah.
in a totally different environment. Like when you, if you know Paris, like how Paris is a very small, pretty, and old traditional city, I would say. In some sense, when you come here, it's kind of the opposite on every way. So I had lucky because I was living in a dorm with other students, so I met friends, etc. But having this like bracket life for months changed me a lot. Like when I
Mm.
came back, I think I was not the same.
So, would you say this is actually something that I've thought about often when you experience a big new thing for the first time? I often feel like, even if it's only 2 or 3 weeks or a month, right? That time period becomes so condensed that it feels like it's like a year or something, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
it's so fruitful
Mm.
from what you learn. And during those 3 weeks, I traveled in Japan. I went to everywhere in Tokyo. You know, like the first time ever you practice your Japanese, you go to even a combini, you're like, oh my god, that's so amazing, etc. So you're still in this phase.
Mm.
And the good thing I think is that when I came back, I was not in the like depression phase, as many people say. I was happy for my experience, and I took everything with me, but only the good points.
Mm.
So I was not like regret for anything or like, oh, I want to come back. I was like, it was so good and it will help me so much to build up other stuff. And I think it helped me a lot to build up my confidence
Mm.
about
Mm-hmm.
many things,
Mm.
about like public speaking,
Mm.
uh, even like social life in general. I've always been like not shy, but quite kind of quiet guy.
Mm.
But when I came to Japan and met so many people, I opened myself more, I would say. And then when I came back to France, also like going out more, meeting like different people, have more friends for different groups. So I think it helped me a lot to grow up.
You got addicted to socializing.
Yeah, yeah. And grown-ups, that's funny to say. But like my parents' friends or family told me like they didn't tell me, from the point you went to Japan, you changed, but they say, oh, it's been few years that I feel that you're different. Like before, you didn't want to speak with older people. You were like a bit
Mm.
shy, etc. Now I love to speak with you. You're so like outgoing, etc. And I think it helped me a lot.
It was a big transformative experience for you
Yes,
coming here. So, okay, that's interesting. You said that you came here, you had a great time, and you thought, this was nice. And you didn't necessarily want to come back or miss the country right away.
yes.
When did you decide to return to Japan and why?
So quickly, I would say. I mean, like 1 year, kind of 1 year and a half after. So
Mm.
it arrived quickly. So I came back. I started my third year of university in France, finish it, and in fact, the fourth year in my business program was supposed to be abroad.
Oh, yes, this is the French style. I actually think that this is really cool. If you don't mind explaining it a little bit, I
Yes.
think the French style of business school is awesome. Like it makes so much sense. So actually, let me see if I remember, and you can correct me. The
Yes.
first 2 years you study in France, and then you are required to
Yes.
do an internship outside
Yes.
of France, right? And a lot of people I met obviously were in Japan. That's how I met them. But I know a lot of people go all over the world, like South America, United States, other countries in Europe. And I suppose you chose Japan then.
And not exactly. That's why
Mm,
Japan became clear for me after this experience,
mm,
the
mm,
one
mm,
I'm going to tell about. Until that point, it was still like, yeah, I like it because my Japanese didn't grow up so much.
mm,
And so when I had to look for the internship abroad, I applied to countries I could spoke the language.
mm.
And so I didn't say in the introduction, but I speak different language because so my family has a multicultural background, but also since like 2012, so when I had like this revelation, I started to study like many language like Chinese, Arabic, German, Italian, Korean, like a lot of
Wow.
languages.
How many of those languages would you say that you speak fluently? So obviously, okay, English, French, I'm
Portuguese,
Portuguese, okay.
Spanish,
Yeah.
Italian, those fluently, no problem.
Wow.
Then Japanese, I don't like to say I speak in fluently. Like I speak good Japanese, I
Mm,
would say that. Chinese, lesser than Japanese, but still quite good. Like when I went to Taiwan, I didn't have troubles.
mm, mm.
And I speak also quite good Arabic. I
Oh,
thought
wow.
I thought it was not that great, but I had the chance to meet some like Arabic speaking people in Japan and I practiced with them and I was surprised like I could have a good conversation with them without trouble.
Why did you decide to also start learning Arabic too? It's curious.
Um, because so I wanted to learn many language,
Mm.
and part of my family comes from Egypt,
Oh,
so they
okay.
spoke Arabic. My dad speaks perfect Arabic, and I heard Arabic a lot at my place when I was a kid, not between my parents because my mom doesn't speak. She kind of understands because her parents too are from Egypt, but
Mm.
for me the language was kind of natural to hear, so it was not that hard to study, and I wanted to study. I kind of like it,
Mm.
especially how to write, etc.
Right.
It's a very funny language.
Another very, well, coming from like a Western's perspective, very unique alphabet, different from the Romantic languages and
And
close.
it looks a lot like Japanese in a way. I can
Mm.
develop if you want, but
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
there is a similarity between Arabic and Chinese or Japanese, like kanji.
Mm, mm,
Because Arabic or Semitic language as a whole, so you have like Arabic, you have Hebrew, and you have Aramaic, even though it's spoken by very few people. So the most are like Hebrew, Arabic, and also Amharic, which is the language in Ethiopia.
mm.
So those like Semitic language have a unique way of being built around like roots. They said it,
Okay.
which is similar to kanji. And one root, like lexical root, is constructed by three letters, and those roots equals like I would say a general idea. So, for example, if you glue together like RTL, it can be like, I don't know, like everything related to sky. So, plane, sky,
Oh.
cloud, etc. So, you can create words by just changing the stem, adding like vowels before and after, and then it's always the same pattern. So, I use the easiest example. If you take like KTB, it's like everything related to book, katab. So
Oh.
from this root, you can write like book, books, I've written,
Library,
library,
maybe? Mm.
anything related to
Interesting.
that.
That's very cool.
So you
Huh.
can recognize the roots and then the stem are similar. So it's kind of the kanji part, semantic one and
Mm.
phonetic. So for me, I made that link. So it was way easier to learn Arabic because
Mm.
I thought like kanji was like vocabulary wise, and then the roots, Arabic roots, were the same.
Mm.
So that's why I study it, and I don't regret. The only problem with Arabic is that very few people speak the formal language, the one I study,
Okay.
because each Arab country has their own
Yes,
dialect.
I've heard that. Yeah.
So
Which one
that's
did you study, by the way?
the written one.
Mm.
So no dialect.
Oh, just written. I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can speak the written form, but it's too formal. So
Okay.
people would write like the written formal one, but speak another one. So it's kind of tricky.
Okay, so if you were to speak the way that you learned through writing, it would sound like a textbook or something, maybe.
Yes, yes,
I
yes,
see.
exactly. So by studying those many language, I so go back to 2016 when I had to do the internship abroad for a year.
Right, right.
I applied to every country I could speak the language. Arabic country not because it was kind of hard to find, like the countries are quite unstable also,
Mm,
and unless I would go to like embassy or something like that,
yeah.
it wasn't I would like, but it was not my top priority. So I applied like US, UK, Spain, Italy, Brazil, China, Japan, Korea.
Mm,
And Japan was the first one to reply to me. So it was kind of a coincidence because I applied to the French consulate of Kansai in Kyoto, so one of the most important institution in Japan for French people. And they say, yeah, we can have you for a year, no problem. We are looking for interns. So like I stopped everything. I said, yeah, of course I will come to Kyoto.
wow.
I've never been there.
Mm.
So from this experience, my kind of my life in Japan and my Japanese level, etc., they really improve and were created from this point on.
That
The first experience in 2014 was more like general experience for me to grow up. 2016 was me and Japan.
mm.
Me in Japan or me with Japan. So very different approach, I would say.
I've got two questions about this. So yeah, your initial experience, it was concentrated, it was really good, but it was short. And then you had this longer, more, we could say, real experience of Japan,
Yes.
living for the long term, and you were in Kyoto. What was the biggest difference that you noticed between your time in Kyoto? And you can compare it from the first experience you had and now, because we're in Tokyo, right? So, how would you say Kyoto is as a city, as a culture, comparing it to any other part of Japan?
Let's talk then about Tokyo specifically. I think almost everything is different. Like the time flows very slowly, and the environment makes you adapt to the situation harder than in Tokyo, because Tokyo, as a big international city, can absorb almost, I would say, any type of person, while
Mm,
Kyoto would reject majority of the
really? In what way would it reject, so to speak?
it. I would say it's a more like traditional and very Japanese
Ah,
city.
okay.
So for me, if you don't speak the language, like let's say the perfect setting in Kyoto for me is or was with like family, kids, having a house, no car or bikes, and having a very like not simple but nice life without trouble, very like everything's going smoothly. This is the like kind of a heaven. I think for me,
Mm,
Kyoto. If you're not in this like criteria, I wouldn't say you would enjoy as much as you can enjoy Tokyo. That's
I
why I'm
see.
saying it can
Mm,
absorb anybody. Tokyo, any profile could fit.
mm.
Like student,
An international
yeah,
city, right? Yeah.
family, single, married, I don't know, anything like
Mm,
expat.
mm.
Like I wouldn't see expat in Kyoto, like international expat living in Kyoto, for example.
So, what was your experience like there overall then? If it sounds like you would really need to integrate very deeply into Kyoto if you wanted to live there for a long time.
So for me, speaking the best Japanese I could, for
Mm,
example, and really like feeling the city as part of my body, I would say, to the point that I
wow.
would travel and visit every place and meet like local people, go to local shops, kind of, I would say, acquire the city as your own.
Mm,
And
mm,
for me, it can be a higher reward, but it can be also a higher downfall. It's
Mm.
kind of a double like coin.
Double-edged
Double,
sword.
yes.
Mm.
So it depends on
Mm.
how you manage your experience in Kyoto. But overall, I think if you know you're going to stay for a long time, etc., Kyoto is an amazing place. It's very different from Tokyo, for example. You don't have any place to go out, or almost. You don't have foreigners, only like tourists. So
Mm.
tourists are not here to be your friends. And
I see.
so you really need to be Japanized. You need to Japanize yourself if you want to like enjoy as much as possible, I would say.
Mm. Um, Going from that point, we had a short conversation before, and you said something very interesting. I asked you about how your impression of the country has changed from before you came here and then after you started living here for the long term. So we'll start from Kyoto. You told me that there was this kind of strange paradox that you felt between feeling very close to society, but also feeling kind of like a wall or something blocking you from getting really close local friends.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
I have a follow-up question about that. Like, what do you think were the challenges exactly there? Like, how did this happen or why did it happen? And then, do you think that there is something you can do to overcome this either cultural or language barrier?
I would say it's more cultural than language, unfortunately. So you could speak perfect Japanese. I don't think, or at the margin, it could change, but unfortunately, it's more cultural. The thing is that I don't want to say that that's a general truth. It's more my experience, but I've almost never felt as good in a society as in Japan, sometimes, not always, but I've never felt happy, I would say, in Japan on a social level with like personal connection with people. So
Mm.
it's a huge paradox because I would say it's kind of on the outside, everything is perfect. Everything you see, everybody, like as they say in Japanese, like harmony is the key to making the society works
Mm.
and people
Mm.
to live together. And you can definitely feel it even though you're a tourist. In few days, like why so many tourists say Japan is the best country to travel,
Ah, yeah.
and why so
Mm.
many foreigners living in Japan say Japan is the best country to travel, but one of the hardest and challenging to live on the long term.
Mm.
This is the paradox. And I think it comes from the definition of friendship. If I take mine, so I don't know, French definition, European, Western, I don't
Mm.
know,
Mm.
because let's say like French one, okay? For me, a friend, and I have few, I would say, even in France, is kind of family, but in a sense that you could always rely on every day, every time, if you have a problem, and you will never cut the link. You will
Mm.
never say like, "Oh, we didn't speak in 5 years." That's not a friend. Then. That
Mm.
can be like acquaintance, but not a friend.
Mm.
And I think in Japan, when you're a foreigner, it's unfortunately almost, if you have this definition, almost impossible to recreate with a Japanese person, especially if they never lived abroad, if they've been their whole
Mm.
life in
Mm.
Japan. And I'm not blaming anybody. It's really like how culture works because even Japanese between them are like that. So, for example, you would say, "Oh my God, yesterday I went," like a lot of students say that, foreign student in Japan. "Yeah, we went to this bar in Shibuya with Masaki and Yumi. It was so great. Like we had the best night." And during the night, like, "Yeah, you're my friend, etc." But then you never hear from them, like
Uh,
in a day from the other,
yeah.
and you don't know why.
I'd like to introduce an idea here, and maybe you're familiar with this. It's kind of a known phrase in Japanese. So, just a little language element here. So, you're a linguist, you might enjoy this. There's a type of Japanese, like, it's not grammar, it's a kanji, a formation of kanji called yoji jukugo. And yoji is 4 characters, jukugo means like when you put words together. This is a terrible translation, but just stay with me here. The phrase is ichigo ichie. And you've heard this before, I guess. And
Yes.
what this means is like an experience in which you meet someone and you have a really good time and you connect with them and then you never see them again.
Yes. And it can be like problematic for a lot of Westerners too,
Mm,
like kind of a shock to
mm,
say like how I cannot process the fact that we spend so much good time and then for no reason the person cut everything.
mm,
Because I would say, I would think that if I did something wrong, the person will be mad at me and they don't want to meet me. But if
mm,
nothing happens, I I cannot process it. Like really, people cannot process why it's so different.
mm,
So in Kyoto, especially, you have kind of two type of population. You have the local one, mostly older people, and the other half is like students from Japan coming to Kyoto because you have a lot of universities, institution,
sure.
but they're not here also to make some friends.
Mm,
They're here to study, maybe travel a bit, but they're not here to like create the bond of their life. Also, Japanese, you of course you probably know that they like to ask foreigners like, "Oh, how long have you been here, and
mm,
until when are you here?" If you say that you're not staying here for a long time, they will never like want to know more about you,
mm.
unless it's like a one like bar night, etc.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Maybe. Um, they will definitely ask you how long have you been here. But I can't speak from personal experience because I've just been here basically for the whole time, right? But I don't know. I think you could probably find some Japanese people who would they'll hear that you're only here for a short amount of time and then they'll hang out with you and then okay, maybe as you say, that'll be it and then the relationship doesn't go anywhere after that. I do feel like there is a certain Japanese mentality on the beauty of that fleeting relationship or
Yes,
something, right?
I
Like
totally agree.
Japan tends to love this idea of these short, beautiful things that disappear quickly, like the cherry blossoms, right? Or they
Yes.
always compare the cherry blossoms falling to the short life of a young samurai. And so you were in Kyoto for a year and you found it kind of hard to connect on a deeper level with Japanese people. And maybe that was because Kyoto was a little bit more traditional. And then you went back to France after that?
Not exactly.
Hmm.
So after that, my university has a special program, but so I had to do an exchange then. So study
Ah.
abroad. So fourth and 5 year were abroad. So fourth year you had to do internship, and then fifth year I went to the States. So I did like France, Japan, States in this order, which is very interesting, like culturally to compare.
Mm, mm.
And I always wanted to visit the USA and even to stay longer. So I studied at New York University for a year, and I had an amazing time
Mm.
on many aspects.
What would you notice was the biggest thing between Japan and the US going directly between the two?
The most shocking thing,
Yeah, because you had
how
spent all this time in Japan.
yes, how people were in the US more like direct, but in a good sense, I would say. Not caring, but in Japan, you feel a bit like everybody wants to conduct their own life like quietly in their bubble. You know, you see in
Mm,
the street, etc. In the US, I felt more like connected. Like people would talk to me more. I felt more like integrated in a sense.
mm,
Also because like I'm a Westerner, so they could think I'm American. But I really
mm,
enjoyed in New York, like it reminded me Paris, like
mm,
going in Manhattan, going to a library, then having a lunch at a deli and speaking with every time the people, hey, how are you, have you been, like
mm,
I like this American vibe. I really enjoyed it and I missed it because
mm,
of in Kyoto especially, people were a bit cold, I would say.
mm,
Not mean at all, but because I can understand Kyoto is the old capital, so they have their own way of also dealing with foreigners. So I don't blame anybody, but Kyoto has the reputation to be a bit colder than other city like Fukuoka, Sapporo, sorry, or Osaka,
mm,
etc. So in the US, I I enjoyed my time like a lot. I couldn't dream of a better place to go after Japan. The only thing that was a bit disappointing in the US was quite similar to Japan in the sense that I found it very hard to connect with American to the very deep level.
What do you think was the reason for that? So, okay, Japanese people have this kind of cultural barrier, but I would say that there's a lot more similarities between France and the United States in terms of culture. So,
Yes, but in that aspect, I would say Japan and US were quite similar.
mm,
My university teacher taught us, even though it's kind of a very big stereotype, but I like it a bit. They said that they classify world population into two categories like peach and coconut.
okay, this sounds interesting. What does that mean?
So basically, peach people are very soft on the outside but very strong on the inside, and coconut is the opposite. And he gave examples, and I was like, damn, it's quite true.
What were the countries that were peaches and what were the countries that were coconuts?
Coconut, very easy, France. Very,
Actually,
very easy.
you know what? I totally agree with that. That was my experience in France too. Like when you get close to French people, it's very, very warm, very
It's
welcoming,
for
kind of like
life.
what you said, right? Like you build a relationship with them and then
They
like
will,
yeah, you're friends,
you're
right?
friends. Like basically, we're friends for a long time or
Mm,
forever. But to crack up, it's very hard. And on the outside, like also on the first time you meet in France, people can be very harsh, impolite, rude, and I know because even French people are like that together.
mm.
But when you crack it down, really, it's really sweet.
I also heard, I don't know out of personal experience, but I also heard that Russians are an example of coconuts. Very
Yes.
hard to crack,
Oh
but
yes.
when you develop a relationship with them, some of the best and most loyal friends you'll ever have.
So coconut, that's what he said. I could agree, but also you have some population in between. But French, Russian, Chinese,
mm,
Koreans, Eastern Europe mainly, and also kind of Middle East, some part of Middle East.
mm,
While peach, he said like USA, like North America, Japan,
mm,
England, more Africa, India also.
mm,
So peach concept, it's easy to describe. Is like, for example, you in the US. I remember one time I went to the drugstore. I need to buy some detergent for laundry, but so I was a total noob. I didn't understand. I was like, I don't know, like, do I have to buy like the solid one? I was like, damn. When I was in France, I'm ashamed to say that, but my parents used to do that.
Hey,
So
if you're living at home, right? You
yeah,
just
and I was like, damn, I
go
don't
with
know
the flow, man.
exactly. So I was, and I remember it was early in the morning. I was still like not woken up, and a random guy, but really like random Jesus came from nowhere. He was like, "Oh, can I help you?" I said, "Oh, sorry, yeah, I'm looking for detergent." "Oh, yeah, you should." Blah 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 blah. He explained me. He took it. He even went to the cashier. He said, "Yeah, yeah, use it. You'll see it's the best." I didn't have time to say thank you. He disappeared. So like really Jesus guy, random Jesus. But
The soap Jesus.
this is the example. You will never see that in France.
Uh,
Never. People would be harsh. If you go to supermarket and you're a bit slow in the queue, people will start to shout at you. So peach is more like you can see in US or Japan, you go to a place, people like ask about you, like, hello, how are you? Are you feeling good today? Do you want that?
mm.
But when you want to pass this line of just kind of formality or education, it's like, no, I'm sorry. So,
That's very interesting. I have heard this description of Americans before. Um, that, yeah, on the surface, it's very friendly, very welcoming, but hard to develop what maybe Europeans would consider to be a deep, meaningful relationship. So, okay, um, I guess we've established that in that sense, oddly, the US and Japan are sort of hard to crack, so to speak. Um,
I was more like a keen, and I felt way more happy with Japanese and US society, like environment,
mm,
than with people. Not saying that
I see.
I didn't have any problem with anybody in Japan. I was it's what I want to tell. It's more like I regret not having the same relation I had in France.
I
The
see.
same
Mm,
friends. Like for example, in France, my close friend, we could meet every day. I'm not saying the same person, but for example, you're at work, it's 3 p.m., you send a text and you say, hey, want to have a beer tonight? Yeah, if he or she's
mm.
free. In Japan, oh my God, never. Sorry, let me check my schedule, maybe in 3 months at this day, etc. So this is the
Uh,
spontaneity I lacked in Japan, or
mm.
a bit in the US. Kind of this like very warm environment where you could go out after work, have a beer, then the next day you meet your best friend. Always being with somebody. Not,
Do you
not
think that comes from the work culture in both Japan and the United States? Like this is kind of a stereotype about these countries, and also considering France in this equation, like France is known for having a great work-life balance, right? And the United
yes.
States and Japan are both workaholic cultures.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a very good point. I never thought about this aspect, but it could be, yes, one of the reason. Yes, because both countries are very different,
of course.
but they tend to be similar on this point, and they have the same like working society. So I think you're right. Probably one of the reason is that.
I want to change gears here just a little bit. Kind of a connected idea, though. You said something very interesting to me before, and I would hope you explain this in more detail. You said living as a foreigner in Japan is great. Okay, we kind of talked about that, right? Being a tourist and just experiencing it on the surface level. Um, but living in Japan as a Japanese, but being a foreigner is a nightmare. I thought that was a very interesting way of describing things, and I want you to explain that a little bit more. I think we understand the first part, right?
Yes.
Being a foreigner in Japan, surface level stuff, okay. But being in Japan and aligning yourself with Japanese society is a nightmare. Why is that?
So I may say that too much, but no. Basically, the idea, and I spoke about that a lot with one of my best friend here in Japan. The idea is quite easy. Is that if you're living that much far away from your country, your family, your friends, your society, so culturally it's very different. You need to take advantage of your position, and only if you can keep the good parts. So, when I said living as a foreigner in Japan is good, I mean that, for example, if you take the work problem, generally people will not have the same standards for you as for Japanese. It could be like for society wise, like things to do or not do. It could be like interpersonal relations, so like cultural problems. They could understand that you're not from here, or at work. They're not expecting the same result or same thing because you're not Japanese. So that's
Hmm.
the good part in the sense that you're not pressured by the same thing as Japanese.
Mm.
So in that case, as Japan has a lot to offer, especially society wise and for a lot of activities, for me it's the best thing, like living as a foreigner. But that doesn't mean you don't speak Japan, or you do not integrate yourself. For example, for me, I want to speak as much Japanese I can, like to a perfect level someday. And I tend to, I would say, assimilate myself, not that much, but to a certain extent, to Japanese society. But I don't want people to look at me as a Japanese. That's what I mean. And so, in the opposite way, if you're foreigner, but you live as a Japanese, when I say as a Japanese, it's not like you are eating natto, or it's more
Yeah.
like you could be replaced anywhere by a Japanese. So your job could be taken by anybody in Japan, a Japanese person, etc. So if you are judged by Japanese standard as a foreigner, it could be a nightmare. That's what I mean. Because you have both bad aspects. First, the pressure, because the Japanese feel a lot of pressure
Certainly.
at work in society. And that's why you see foreigners more relaxed because they're not judged by that. They don't feel it that much. So society put them away kind of in a good spot. And so if you're a foreigner and you are judged by Japanese laws and custom, it's double hard because you have the Japanese pressure and also you're a foreigner. So you don't know how to do that, you don't speak perfect Japanese, etc. So if your life you cannot like take part of the good advantage and aspect Japan gives you as a foreigner, that's why it could be a big problem.
So it would be like a coconut with a peach center.
Yes, exactly. Double edge. Yeah,
Sounds terrible.
I mean, some people may live like that, but what I mainly mean is that Japan is a very divided society in a sense, not between people, but they have categories for almost everything. While Western society are more like, I don't know how to say that in English. I might like
unclear kind
like,
of gray zone stuff. Yeah,
exactly. So here, like foreigner, not foreigner, Japanese, non-Japanese, male, female, etc., etc. So if you are in the good spot always, you can like take advantage of so much good stuff.
There is
traveling, discovering, like the food is amazing, the language, people are amazing here. Like visiting shrine, going to local shops, like the country, even though it's small, it has so much to offer you. But only, I would say, if you have this kind of freedom. It's kind of a freedom mentality of being a foreigner in Japan and not judge as Japanese standard. That's what I mean.
We would call this traditionally within the expat community the gaijin card. Have you heard this phrase before? Okay, yeah. So this is where you take advantage of the fact that you look foreign, so people expect less from you, even though maybe you've been living here for like 10 years or something, right? And you speak Japanese.
That's what I mean.
But, you get into a situation where it's just inconvenient to, quote unquote, follow the rules or do these annoying little cultural hang-ups, so to speak. And you're just like, well, screw it. I'm just not going to do that because I don't want to. And you play the gaijin card. Sometimes it's also referred to as a gaijin smash.
Yeah,
where you
I didn't know that.
Something dumb like, I don't know, taking up extra room on the train or making noise.
That's more like being. It's not. I wouldn't say it's about that because that's kind of rude. Like
it is that goes into a different direction. Gaijin card and gaijin smash are not exactly the same thing.
For me, no, because again, I'm not Japanese. I will never be Japanese. I will never be judged or considered Japanese. But I abide by the law here. So, for example, if you see me in the street, I won't say I look Japanese, but like I'm quite shy, quiet. I walk like everybody. I'm not like medatsu. I'm not like
standing out.
Yeah, like look at me. No, not at all. It's more like for the whole idea is for your personal like balance. Because again, and it can be also I think it's only my opinion. I'm very attached to my family and friends. So for me, my biggest flaw here is not having them. Even though I have friends and friends I really, really appreciate, there are not many of them and no family. So for me, it's always this reminder of I'm alone. I'm kind of alone. So at least let me have a very nice time in life. So I'm not abid by those pressuring laws, etc., with the shacho, the Japanese traditional company where you need to go and drink until 3 a.m. Everybody's Japanese. You don't feel you're in the right spot. And I understand that culturally it's so different. So that's the whole idea.
Where would you say you are at in your Japan journey now? So if we tie the rest of your story together, you were working at the embassy and then you went to the United States and eventually you came back to Japan.
Yes, so that's the next thing. So after I'll go quickly because it's already a long time. Let me explain. So after the USA, again to like certificate or like to validate everything I've done until that point, I had to do another internship abroad. But at that time, for me, Japan was like more obvious than USA because I already had like proposition, and from my time in Kyoto, I met people, so they proposed to me, oh, I do want to work next year as a. So I went to Japan, but in another city again, Fukuoka.
Mm.
So I discover again like another Japan because Kyoto, Tokyo, it's kind of a duality, and the rest of Japan for me is kind of similar. So I went to Fukuoka for like few months. It was a very challenging experience. I really
What were
like
you
it.
doing there?
I work in a famous company called Fukuoka now. Actually, it's a publishing company.
Mm.
They publish like a magazine every month about like everything about Fukuoka for foreigners.
I see.
So it's written in Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. And I really like my time in Fukuoka. Not so much my time at work, for for the reason, but some people were very great, but the work was kind of special. And so after the internship, I came back to France in the idea that I was going to start working because I just graduated, like finally. But when I came back to France, I was like 23, sorry, and I was like, oh, I'm a, I'm still a bit young. I still have some time. Why not? I don't know, for 1 or 2 years, do something. And I applied to like grad school in France,
Mm.
and I was selected by actually the one of the best one called Paris Dauphine, one of the best university in France. And from the start, I wanted to go there, like from high school, but I didn't have the good grades at this time. So when they told me like, yeah, like we want you, like you are accepted for a year in a grad school, I was like, hell yes.
Mm.
And this year was amazing. That's also the university of my parents. Both studied there. Very nice one. So I was more than happy. And I studied there like international affairs and trading, commodities, and energy. And after graduating, I came back to Japan.
Mm.
So in 2018, late 18, where I work in a French car company. Car, I mean, yeah, automotive company in Yokohama. Also, special hard experience, but very interesting. I met so many great person, and like it was the natural developing
Mm. Mm. Mm.
stuff for me. And at that point, I was like kind of at the same point as now. So like speaking Japanese, knowing Tokyo very well, having my friends, etc. So even though I had the chance to then develop more and travel across Japan, it was at that point that it create like kind of the current one, the vibe I am in.
Okay, so wow, you've done a lot of different things in Japan. You were at the embassy. You worked at publishing, kind of publishing, right, in
Yes,
Fukuoka. You worked through an automotive industry job. Okay, 2018. Have you been in Japan since then until now?
yes.
Okay, wow. So that's basically 5 years at this
I've
point.
I've gone back to France for like holidays, etc. But
Mm-mm.
basically, yes.
Okay, I see. And I guess my next question would be then, where do you see yourself going now? You've had all of these different experiences, all of these different opportunities, and working in many different fields. And we talked about, the difficulties and the easy or the nicer things. But are you planning on staying here for the long term? Um,
That's a question you always ask yourself.
right? Yeah.
That's very hard to answer. Like, it takes too much parameters, I would say, in a sense. So, my best answer is I don't know.
Mm.
Like, since I entered university, I stopped planning everything in advance. I'm more like not a daily like planning guy, but anything can change so quickly.
You take
Like,
the opportunities as they come,
yeah,
maybe.
it can
Yeah.
change in like a week.
Mm, mm, mm.
Like I have a friend I remember, he was like unemployed and single and very sad, like few years I remember in France. And in 1 week, he found a girlfriend and a job, but really in the same week. So
Wow.
his whole life changed in like 4 days
That's incredible.
for the good part.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm more into this kind of spirit that everything can change very easily and quickly, especially in our current world.
Sure.
So why not? Maybe, possibly, if there is something that corresponds to me and I really enjoy it there, why not? Like if you're happy in some place, why change?
Mm,
Especially, especially if you have no reason of changing. So that's a possibility, yes.
okay. And I guess for like a final wrap up question, you mentioned to me that you want to make use of all of these experiences, your language abilities, your understanding of different cultures, different styles of working, et cetera, and try to build this bridge between Japan and like basically every other region of the world. You told me like Europe, Asia,
That's
Africa,
no,
America,
that's very ambitious. That
right?
was more.
I wanted to know a little bit more about how you envision that cultural bridge to be built, and like what exactly do you want to achieve with that?
My not regret, but one of the biggest thing I would like to work on in Japan is that at the same time, like being more accustomed to Japanese society in general, but also developing all language I can speak and train my like kind of my international mind. So, for example, I met some person from Peru a few months ago. I was so happy to like speak Spanish, but like naturally speaking Spanish, asking about Peru, like what, like it's kind of refreshing.
Mm,
And when you've been living in Japan also for a long time, I think when you travel abroad and you come back, you're like, it was so fresh. Even though
mm,
your life in Japan is great, but just changing a bit, going to Europe, Asia, you're like, wow, that was kind of a fresh water I just got. So at the same time, like developing the fact that I can speak Korean, Chinese, I don't know, Spanish, etc., and building bridge. The thing is that Japan is very connected to the world, but only in specific areas, I would say.
okay. Which areas would you say those
I,
are?
th- I think they're lacking a lot of anything but culture. So culturally, you
Mm,
can see that majority of the international student they come like you have so many Japanese language schools in
sure.
Tokyo, etc. But on the professional level, like technological engineering, like big projects of like for example like decarbonization, etc. I think Japan lacks like the links with other region of the world. They're still protective, and you can see that when you're working with Japanese, that most of the problem they got is when they're working with like foreigners, whether it's in the same company or abroad, like
Mm,
because communication, etc. So it can be tricky, and I think foreigners that are living in Japan and speak Japanese and other language could be the best bridge to overcome this in many ways, because again culturally you can see with the tourism, you can see with like the Japanese culture like J-pop, how much it's spread around the world. So it's not about that, this is
mm,
absolutely like already established. So it's more on a, I would say a deeper level. Like one thing I feel a bit not sad but a bit annoyed is that tourists or even people staying few years or months in Japan, they lack the real spirit of Japan. I think like they just keep the the outside layer. So for example, some people could be like clubbing, partying, some people could be the J-pop, some people could be other stuff, but I think it's so much more. And Japan is not very well at selling what they really are. It's more like
Mm,
a product they're selling for foreigners, more on a money or business level. They don't want to show how they really are because society is like that. People don't want to show their true feelings. So I think that the country as a whole is also like that.
mm, mm,
And
mm, mm.
in the end, you have different categories of foreigners living in Japan or who lived, but I'm sure you met those people, and you have many people that love Japan to a extremity, I think, without any like rationality, and others that really dislike every aspect without rationality. And I think they're kind of the same, and they didn't get like how real the life is here. And in
Mm.
between, like everybody is about nuance. Everybody's about that in life, and especially in this country, which is like one of the grayest in a sense. Like deep Japan is so different than what you see on the outside.
I totally agree. I think navigating the Japanese experience, certainly as a foreigner, but even as a Japanese person, it's kind of hard, right? Elements of the language also, I think, contribute to this. Japanese is notoriously known for how unclear it can be sometimes, and that you're expected to try and feel what the other person is feeling without saying it directly. And that can certainly add to this level of like no one no one really knows what's going on.
Like the best expression in Japanese, I love it, is anmoku no rikai.
Oh yeah, this is
It's so hard.
really
It's very
weird. It's like a unspoken understanding. Although that is funny if you really go into it. If you test this amongst Japanese people, you can see that maybe it doesn't exist because they think that they understand what the other person is thinking.
but they
And
never.
yeah, and the other person thinks that they understand what you're thinking. But actually, if you like sit down and talk it out like
Yes.
very directly, it's like, oh wow, we were talking about something completely different.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
Understanding that element of Japan, and Japanese society, I think it won't fix the experience, but it will at least make it easier because you can see
Yeah, of
why this is
course.
happening, right? It's very interesting, and it can be very frustrating.
And it happens a lot, especially in like dating life in Japan. Like
Mm,
anmoku no rikai, whether it's like between Japanese or non-Japanese, because like the codes are so different that in the beginning, because like love overflows, so everything is okay. But at some point when it becomes serious, most of the problems that international couples I think have here is like
mm,
like
mm,
cultural shock or difference. At some point, something will happen, but it can work out if both can like not make effort but work out this problem. And generally, when like couples break up, etc., it's because both of them were not really prepared for that. They were more like kind of sorry, what you said about like the flashing romantic, like oh it's a flirt, etc. But
mm.
when it becomes like longer and more serious, people are not prepared at all. So the cultural shock arrives very very quickly. And I remember that very well for a good reason, that in Kyoto at the consulate we used to of course have the register of birth, death, marriage and
Marriages. Hmm.
divorce. And I remember I had to redo it, like to do the update this year, and they gave me like so four categories. But when I saw like divorce and marriage, I was like, whoa, sorry, you gave me the same thing twice. And they say, no, no, no. I said, yeah, yeah, look, it's the same thing. And they say, no, 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 I'm sure of me. And actually, they were correct, but the same marriage became divorce. Like, a lot. I
Mm.
think more than 60%. So I was like, damn, why? And people say, bunka no chiga, like cultural difference. And majority of the case, I felt sad for those people. I was like, that much? But because most of them are not prepared for that.
Mm.
And because in that case, it was French Japan. So it could be anything else. But in that case, those cultures are so different on many levels, especially on like dating or love level, that it can be a huge. I can imagine.
Sure, sure.
So that's also, I would say that Japan has a very strong cultural context, and you need to be aware of way more than just, like I live here, I work, and the rest I don't care. If you really, really want to be here, to develop personal relation with people, friends or lover, I don't know, like you need to be aware of that.
It's certainly a delicate, if not difficult, balance between maintaining your home culture,
Yes.
understanding and integrating into Japanese culture, but then also being prepared to know that sometimes in some situations you will never be fully accepted into Japan for whatever reason,
Yes.
and then constantly trying to dig deeper. It's a journey, and maybe it's not just Japan. Your experiences in any other foreign country and culture are probably going to reflect this. But one thing I heard about Japan, that someone described it as such, and I thought, wow, that's really true. It was, Japan is just like any other country, but more so.
Yes.
Everything
On
about it is
everything.
just
Yes.
more extreme.
Yes.
And that's definitely an important piece of information to
Yes,
keep in
I
mind.
totally agree with that.
We're almost out of time for today. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, just for everybody listening. So this country is worth knowing for even the smallest part. Like really, even though you cannot spend much time learning the language, learning the culture, or visiting, the smallest part will give you something very interesting on everything. So I can encourage everybody to like dig deeper into this.
Well, thanks for those words of encouragement. Fabien, was a great conversation. We got a lot of really interesting insight. And yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks.